everybody. This is Pastor Sam Rambo. This is another edition of our Sunday review. We're reviewing our Sunday service that aired on July 11th, 2021. So if you're listening in a different date, this is the Sunday that we're doing it for. So we've been going through our series of The Pursuit of Happiness. This is our third installment of it. First week we talked about what is happiness, where does happiness actually come from, and then this last week we talked about liberty. So the reason why we're going through the Pursuit of Happiness series is because when I was thinking back about like doing a summer series, I was like, what do I think of when I think of summer? And the number one thing that I think when I think summer is happiness. And then also going along with like July 4th, harkening back to the Declaration of Independence, those are that's one of three things that the Declaration of Independence said that were human rights: life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So I thought, hey, this is a great way to kind of tie in like that 4th of July, because it happened on a Sunday. So it was a great way to tie that into an overarching series on happiness. So a part of some of the things that we need to understand when we're having a conversation about a specific topic is, what are we actually saying? So when we talked about happiness week 1, we said, okay, what actually is happiness and where does it come from? So the definition that we walked away with from happiness is that happiness is the overall enjoyment and contentment with life. So this is not predicated upon any experience or any circumstance. So happiness is not circumstantial. There are things that can make you feel happy, but that's not ultimately what happiness is. And what we talked about was happiness ultimately comes from God. But one thing that we really keyed on and that we really need to key on today is that happiness ultimately comes from the experiencing of God. So true happiness comes from experiencing God. So the question for today is, how do we get to that place where we're happy? How do we get to that place where we are experiencing God? So before we get into the answers to those questions, we have to understand something. God has actually called us to be happy. And we know this for sure because God has called us to experience Him. That is why we were created in the first place. We are created to have a relationship with God. And since God is not this person who's full of misery, who's this person full of oppression, this person that is not full of, all of those horrible things, God is glorious. He's beautiful. He's wonderful. So when you walk away from experiencing time with Him, you should be experiencing happiness because that's who God is. The wonders of God should bring happiness to us. So since we've been called to experience Him, since we are created to experience Him, it follows that we are created and we are called to be happy. We are created to be happy, to find happiness with God. So looking at that truth, how do we experience God? So a couple of our answers this morning, really quickly, is we need to seek God, number 1, and number 2, we need to go deeper. So tackling number 1, to seek God. Matthew 7:7 says this: "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you." So here's some facts. God has already made Himself able to be found by people. God is not hiding from us. This is something we talked about last week in Romans 1. He has already made Himself clearly known to the world. God says that there is nothing hidden, that He has made Himself clearly known to all peoples on the earth so that they're without excuse. He's made His law known on their hearts, so there's no excuse. So that was like in a condemning way, but we're going to take that in more of a positive way this morning, thinking about, well, God has already revealed Himself to us. So He's able to be found. He's able to be sought. Over and over in the Scriptures, it tells us to seek Him. Now, this is something that they talked about in the Old Testament quite a bit, talking to the nation of Judah or the nation of Israel, saying, seek first the Lord, like seek God. If you seek God, you will find God. Jesus says later, if you seek me, you will find me. All over in the prophets, when Jesus is speaking, when when Paul is speaking, there's this huge concept of seeking God. And something we need to kind of understand about seeking is that seeking is not fast or easy, usually. It's not always fast or easy. Seeking is a journey intent on finding. There's a statement that everybody's on their own journey. Everybody's seeking the truth in their own way. This is actually false. There's a big difference between seeking and wandering. What we see from a lot of people is that they're wandering. Because the difference between seeking and wandering is one has a goal in mind, one has an end goal in mind, but the other one has no real intentions whatsoever. One is directive, one is aimless. One has stakes and accountability, while the other one's like really ambiguous, and there's nothing really to show for it. So seeking is going somewhere, and wandering is going anywhere. Matthew 7:13 through 14 says this, "For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many will enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few will find it." So this is kind of to support our idea of not everybody seeking, some are wandering. So I think there's that specific difference. Not everybody that seeks is going to continue to seek and going to find. But the fact remains, if you do seek God, you will find him. If you continue that seek, if you continue that to seek, if you continue that exploration, that journey, you will find God. You will. If you seek him with everything. And that's another concept that we'll talk about later on. So then tackling number 2 of how do we be happy and how do we experience God. Number 2, we need to go deeper. So we can't be content with having a shallow relationship with God. One of the object lessons that I kind of talked about, or one of the thought experiments that I thought about on Sunday, was picturing God as like the ocean or a body of water, right? He is so vast and incomprehensibly deep. And, I kind of thought about, we experience water in very limited places. So like right now I'm drinking a water bottle. When we go outside when it's raining, we can see puddles. I live next to a river. So there's a lot of like small bodies of water that I'm aware of, but if you've ever gone to the ocean, it is so incredible. Like as far as you can see, it's just water. And thinking about how deep and vast it is, and when you think about all the different creatures that live inside of it, like the ocean is incomprehensibly deep. And if you've ever watched like an explanation video about how deep the ocean is, it's so deep that if you put the highest building in the world on top of the highest mountain, it still doesn't even reach the deepest depths of the ocean. And that's just insane and incredible to me. It's so deep that not even halfway down, light can't even be seen anymore. And so, like when you think about how deep and how great and just how incomprehensible the ocean is, like it kind of hurts your head. And honestly, it makes you scared. And picturing a relationship with God in that way of like, I can live in these small pools of God in my life, or I can decide to jump in the ocean, because the ocean is scary. And for most of history, people have been afraid of the ocean, have been afraid of the sea, even though seeing it as necessary, right? In order to get from place to place, they needed to go by sea. They even go by sea today. But one of the rules is that the ocean is the ruler, and you are a passenger. The ocean's in control, not you. And there's actually this Hebrew concept of sea, looking at the sea as chaos. This is something that actually Revelations talks about. In the new heavens and new earth, there won't be a sea anymore, meaning there won't be any more chaos. There won't be this, just this figure of dread in heaven. So thinking about God in terms of the ocean, if you want to be with God more, you have to play by his rules. You can't keep that small body of water anymore. The thing is God has called us to go deeper. To not seek to go deeper with God is actually not to value God at all. A relationship with God that is determined by our parameters is not a relationship with God. It's a glorification of yourself. So let me say that again. A relationship with God that's completely determined by you isn't a relationship. It's worshiping yourself. And that's one of those things that we really need to let hit us this morning, or let hit us today whenever you're listening to this, is we have to go deeper with God, because that's what we're called to. We were called to love God like this. When Moses was talking to the people in the valley in Deuteronomy, he says this in Deuteronomy 4:24, "For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God." So God is jealous because he's deserving of all praise and glory. God is deserving of exploration. Your relationship with him is what you were actually made for. So another concept that we see is in Deuteronomy 4:29. "But if you from there seek the Lord your God, you will find him if you seek him with all of your heart and with all of your soul." So, like what we talked about before, in order to be happy, in order to experience God, you have to seek him. But you have to continue to seeking, and that's that second part. You have to seek deeper. You have to go deeper. And that kind of ends with this conclusion of you have to seek him with everything. So that is that going deeper. Seeking him with all of our heart and with all of our soul, with everything that we have inside of us. We seek him. God has to be everything to us. We must seek him, and we must seek for all of him. A wonderful word picture that I thought of when I was younger was thinking, I had this dream where I was underneath this cube, and it was farther than I could see. I couldn't see the end of it, and I looked to my right and couldn't see the end of it. Looked at all four sides, and I couldn't see the end of this cube. And I remember thinking, I don't even know how tall this is. So get that in your word picture. Think about this empty space, and then as far as you can see, you can't see the end in any direction. But you still don't know how tall this cube is on top of you. And that's kind of how I thought about God, is I can search, I could walk in any direction, and I could search, and I could discover what those things are. But he's so deep that it's so incomprehensible to me. I still can't even scratch the surface of who God is. But we're called to that because we were created to do that. And also, when I was thinking about this whole concept, I was thinking about what true science is. True science is, science in its purest form is the pursuit of the God-given curiosity to understand his creation. So in its purest form, it's that pursuit of that curiosity that God gave us. It's trying to figure out, how did you create these things? What have you created? There's still animals that we have not discovered. There's still plants we haven't yet discovered. Looking at the outer universe, there's so many planets we don't even know exist. There's so many stars we don't even know exist. What science does is it's just tapping into that curiosity that God has given us to search him out, to seek for him. Two things that every human was created with was that sense of curiosity and that sense of creativity. And these two are biggest in children. Children have the most creativity. Children have the biggest curiosity. And the reason why is because the real world tells us that because we can't know everything, we shouldn't look. You shouldn't be curious. Curiosity killed the cat. We have sayings like that. And the real world tells us that there's nothing new and that everything's already been done, so you don't need to be creative. The real world tries to destroy those two things that God has given us. The thing is this is a part of why Jesus told us in Matthew 18:3. "Truly I tell you, unless you change and you become like a little child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." And a part of this, whole keeping that creativity and keeping that curiosity is because when those sentiments of that's just a childish thing, when those sentiments seep into our soul and it becomes our response to God of saying, since I can't know him, I'm going to stop being curious. Since I don't know him, I'm going to stop being creative. what's going to happen to us is our soul is going to stagnate, and that stench of that stagnated soul will just seep into the rest of our lives, and people will just become these dull, boring beings that have no life in them and no real happiness. So the two ways that we experience God is by one, seeking him, and two, seeking him deeper. So they kind of go hand in hand. But one of those biggest things that we think about when we think of happy is, how do I stay happy? So I've gotten to this point. I seek God, and I continue to seek God. How do I stay seeking him? In a sense, how do I stay happy? And to kind of answer that, in Greek, there's this word called skinu, which means to dwell, to live, to shelter, to take up residence. The sense of buying in, or the sense of choosing to stay. There's just like this concept of dwelling, of staying. And this is something that God has called us to dwell with him, to dwell inside of him. We see this all over in scriptures, to dwell with him. We see in Revelations when God says, or when John sees God dwelling with his people, him being their God and them being his people, this staying, this dwelling. So this is something that we're called to in terms of God. And we can see this play out with Peter when he's on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus. And he just says, why don't I build a couple shelters, one for you, one for Elijah, one for Moses, and then, some for us. This sense of not wanting to leave this place, this dwelling place, because he saw the full glory of God. One of my personal favorite verses is Psalm 27:4, which says this: "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections, and to seek him in his temple." So a quick pastor's note about this passage. I actually combined the NLT and then NIV translations together to kind of make it flow better, and also to kind of pull out some of those things that I really like. So I added the NLT portion of delighting in the Lord's perfections. So that I really like the imagery of just delighting in him being perfect. And the NIV says to gaze on the beauty of the Lord. But I really like this concept of delighting in him and delighting in his perfections. I just really like that imagery. So I combine those two just to kind of give ourselves kind of like a more... I really personally like the NIV, and I really like that delighting in the Lord's perfection. So I kind of combine them just to kind of grab multiple things from the same verse, just different translations. So I do want to mention this. These aren't meant to be combined, and you should be really careful when you're doing it. But we combine it for our own purposes this morning, knowing that this is like, we have to be careful with this. So I just want to make my intentions clear. So for David, there was no other place for him to dwell than to be with God. David planted himself in the Lord and made God's presence his home. For David, he wasn't content with being with God once a week. So this is something that we can really learn as American Christians. Sundays, that's our time to meet with God. For David, he would have just thrown up at that idea of only spending a day with God. Being in God's presence wasn't recreational. It wasn't superficial. It wasn't something that he just checked off. It wasn't just something for him to do. For David, spending time with God was his life. In Exodus 33, the nation of Israel had just dealt with the golden calf situation where Moses had been with God for a considerable amount of time, and the people grew restless. And then they made for themselves an idol that would be on their own time that they could control. Part of that imagery of God being that ocean, that kind of scary thing that's like this uncontrollable force that you're completely reliant upon. And they didn't really like that, so they kind of built for themselves a little pool, like what we talked about before. And the Lord burned with fury against that nation and rebuked them sternly. And God became so full of anger that he cast them away from the mountain where they were, where he gave them the law, which is such a special moment. So then going on in that passage of Exodus 33, what we see is the people are away from the mountain, and Moses sets up this tent called the Tent of Meeting, and he goes out there every night, and everybody that went out there, they got to see the Lord or be with the Lord. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, everybody would get out and stand at the entrance of their tent and praise God and glorify him and worship him. And then what we see in verse 11 is that when the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend, then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. So for me, I really connected with that of just Joshua not wanting to leave. Moses had a job to do, but for Joshua, he was in this position where he could just wait and he could just stay in the Lord's presence. And that is just such a beautiful thing that I really wanted to take for myself. So given the opportunity to meet with God, Joshua, who eventually led the nation of Israel, refused to leave that tent. So something that we need to take away is, in order to stay happy, we have to continue in the presence of God. We have to make our dwelling in his happiness. We have to dwell in God in order to stay happy. Meaning we have to uproot our lives and the things that we think make us happy and replant it in God, where happiness dwells from, or comes from. So I was kind of thinking about, why is it so hard for us to stay happy? And I kind of got this imagery of like having spiritual ADHD. I have physical ADHD, which is just a chemical difference of how you see things and how you interpret things, right? And my actually ADHD is a part of why I'm the way I am. That's part of the reason why I think so deep about things. That's the reason why I think about so many different things. That's why I have so many different tastes. Because my mind is constantly running, and I'm constantly bringing in new concepts, and I'm constantly thinking about new things. So ADHD has really helped me. But when we have spiritual ADHD, it's hard for us to pay attention to God. Our attention span is so small when it comes to staying on God. And a part of this is because we can't see him. And even if you think about the things that you can see, it's hard enough for us to keep our attention on the things we can see. But now understanding, we can't see this person. We can't see this entity that we're spending time with. Even though we can't see God, we can see the real physical effects that he has on us. To stay in his presence, we have to dwell on the effect that he has already had on us. Remember those things that have already been done to us. Remember those things. Remember those real experiences we've had on him. In order to stay happy, in order to stay in that place of dwelling with God, we have to recall and we have to remember, we have to dwell on those effects that he's had on us. Another reason why it's so hard for us to stay happy is that circumstances in our life, both present, past, and future, have this tendency to hold us back. Rather than dwelling on God, we dwell on the problems in our lives. Thing is the problems that we have are real. Some of us have dealt with sexual abuse. Some of us have dealt with physical abuse. Some of us have dealt with friends leaving us. Some have dwelt with mates leaving us. We've dealt with betrayal. We've dealt with physical problems. We've dealt with emotional problems, with spiritual problems. And for us, it's hard. And these things are real, and they shouldn't be thought of as nothing. But even though those things are so hard, and even those things are so deep to us, I'm going to say this. Stop dwelling on the problems and start dwelling on the promise. 7:14 says this: If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. Now, this is a specific promise to the nation of Israel, but we can take a lot of things from this. If we humble ourselves and we turn from our wickedness, God is going to hear us. And if we ask for forgiveness, if we seek him, of course he's going to forgive us. And if we need healing, he will heal us. He will heal us either in this life or the next. Because like what we talked about the past, like 5 or 6 weeks going through the 16 fundamental truths, we talked extensively about the end times and about the redemption that God is going to bring to all people and to all things. So we know that there's either going to be healing in this lifetime because he's able to heal, or there's going to be healing at the end of times where God heals everything. So there's that promise that God will heal and redeem all things. So we need to hold on to that promise. And that's part of the reason why it's so hard for us to stay happy. Because we dwell on those problems, but we can't. So just to kind of fully recap this morning, how do we get happy? We have to seek God, and we have to continue to seek God. And then how do we stay happy? We have to dwell with God, and we have to dwell on the promise. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your day and watching this video. Please drop a like and a comment just to help out the algorithm and get this channel out there a little bit more. Just want to say thank you so much for being a part of our church community. If you'd like to give, we have some giving information for you. If you'd like to be a part of our church on Sundays, we're open every Sunday at 10. We'd love to have you if you're in the Charles City area. Thank you guys so much again for being a part of our church community. Have a great day.